She never believed love was meant for her. It was not because she had never been offered it, but because the love she had known in the past had left scars so deep that she never wanted to open that door again. Each memory of betrayal felt like a shadow that followed her wherever she went, whispering reminders that trusting someone was dangerous. She had learned to build walls around her heart, strong and tall, convincing herself that life was easier without attachments. Her friends would sometimes tease her, saying she was too serious or too stubborn, but she only smiled and changed the subject. Deep inside, she was not stubborn. She was afraid. Love to her was not warmth and laughter. It was pain, disappointment, and endless questions about her worth. So she made a silent promise to herself. Never again would she let anyone close enough to break her. She focused on her work and her small circle of family. Work became her safe place. Every morning she filled her schedule so tightly that there was no space for thoughts of loneliness. Evenings were spent reading, listening to music, or watching shows that kept her mind distracted. On the surface, her life looked calm, even stable. But at night, when she lay in bed, silence revealed the truth she didn't want to admit. She felt the emptiness pressing on her chest. She longed for companionship, but the fear of being hurt was stronger than the desire. So she told herself again and again, she was better alone. Her family often tried to encourage her to meet new people. Sometimes they gently suggested that she should give love another chance. But whenever the topic of relationships came up, she shook her head and laughed as if the idea was ridiculous. Inside, however, it wasn't laughter. It was fear disguised as confidence. She thought, why invite more pain into my life? Why take the risk of being betrayed again? The idea of a human partner was not just unappealing, it was terrifying. Her closest friend once told her, not everyone is the same. You can't judge every man by the mistakes of one. She had smiled politely, but her heart whispered, they are all the same. She didn't say it aloud, but she carried that belief deep inside. In her eyes, all promises eventually broke. All affection eventually faded, and all trust eventually turned into regret. She grew comfortable with the idea of independence. She convinced herself she didn't need anyone. She learned to enjoy her coffee alone, take long walks without a hand to hold, and celebrate small victories by herself. She even convinced herself that happiness was possible this way. But the truth was different. There were moments when she watched couples laughing in a cafe, or parents playing with children in the park, and she felt a sharp ache in her chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was a quiet sadness, the kind that comes when you realize you've locked yourself out of something your heart still secretly desires. Yet every time that desire tried to surface, she pushed it down. She remembered how it felt when someone she trusted had turned their back on her. She remembered the words that once sounded so sweet, but later became empty echoes. She remembered how she had once given her whole heart, only to watch it shatter, piece by piece. That memory was enough to silence any longing for love. It was enough to remind her why she had chosen to walk this path alone. In her private moments, she wrote in a journal. Most of her pages were filled with reflections, small notes about her day, or dreams she pretended she no longer cared about. One night she wrote, I don't hate love, I just don't trust it. Maybe some people are meant to be alone, maybe I'm one of them. She closed the journal quickly, almost ashamed of the truth her pen had revealed. Still, a small part of her wondered if she was wrong. She wondered if perhaps somewhere out there, a different kind of love existed, one that didn't end in pain. But she had no courage to search for it. She told herself that even if it did exist, it wasn't for her. It was safer to stay where she was, safe behind the walls she had built. Her routine continued day after day, month after month. She went to work, met friends occasionally, smiled when people expected her to smile, and laughed when the situation called for laughter. But her heart remained untouched, locked away, hidden from the world. To others she seemed fine, maybe even strong. But the truth was, her strength came from fear, not from peace. Whenever someone tried to get close, she found a way to step back. If a kind stranger started a conversation, she ended it quickly. If someone showed interest in her, she dismissed it before it could grow into something more. She told herself she was protecting her heart, but deep inside, she knew she was also isolating it. In quiet moments, she sometimes asked herself, will I always be like this? Will I grow old watching life pass me by, too afraid to let anyone in? The thought scared her, but not as much as the thought of trusting the wrong person again. That was the paradox of her life. She feared loneliness, yet she feared love, even more. For her, the thought of a human partner was like a storm on the horizon. It could look beautiful from far away, but up close it meant destruction. She chose distance, even if it meant never feeling the rain or seeing the rainbow that might follow. She believed she was safe, and safety was enough. Or so she thought. What she didn't know was that life had already begun preparing a twist she could never expect. Somewhere out there, someone existed who would quietly, gently, and patiently prove her wrong. A soldier with his own scars, his own past, and his own lessons would cross her path. And when he did, everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and fear would slowly begin to change. But at this point in her story, she didn't know that yet. She only knew her walls were high, her heart was closed, and she had no plan of ever letting anyone inside. Life has a strange way of arranging meetings when we least expect them. She was not looking for anyone, not searching for love, not even open to the idea of meeting new people. But sometimes, destiny works quietly, behind the scenes, and places someone in front of us at the exact moment we least imagine it. It happened on an ordinary day. The weather was mild, the streets were busy, and she was rushing through her routine as always. She was carrying a bag of groceries, her mind filled with thoughts of work deadlines and the small list of chores waiting at home. Nothing in that moment hinted that her life was about to take a small but important turn. As she walked out of the store, distracted by her phone, she didn't notice the uneven step near the curb. Her foot slipped, and the grocery bag nearly flew from her hands. Before she could fall, a strong hand reached out, steadying her. Surprised, she looked up. A man stood there, tall, dressed casually, but with a presence that felt sharp and disciplined. His grip was firm, but his eyes carried a kind of calm strength. "You're all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She nodded quickly, almost embarrassed. "Yes, thank you. I should have been paying more attention." He smiled lightly, not in a mocking way, but in a reassuring one. "It happens to everyone." She adjusted her bag, gave a polite smile, and hurried off without another word. That was how she was. Quick to escape before anyone could start a conversation. She didn't even glance back to notice that he was watching her for a moment. Not with curiosity alone, but with the sharp instinct of someone trained to observe details. For her, it was just a passing incident. But life had other plans. A week later, she saw him again. This time it was at the small park near her apartment, a place she often visited to clear her mind. He was sitting on a bench, reading a book. She almost didn't recognize him at first, but when their eyes met, a small flicker of recognition passed between them. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement, polite but not intrusive. She returned it briefly, then walked past, telling herself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Something about his presence stuck in her thoughts that evening. She reminded herself not to read too much into it. After all, she wasn't interested. Still, she couldn't deny that his face had stayed in her mind longer than she expected. Their paths crossed again. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but she later realized he lived not far from her building. He was a soldier, recently returned from deployment, spending some time in the city before his next assignment. That explained his posture, the quiet discipline in the way he carried himself, and the watchfulness in his eyes. He wasn't loud or overly talkative. When they did speak, it was always short, respectful exchanges. "Good morning?" "Nice." "Weather today?" Or simple remarks about the neighborhood. Unlike others who tried to draw her into long conversations, he never pushed. He seemed to sense her hesitation and gave her space. This puzzled her. Most people, when they sensed her, distance either pressed harder or gave up entirely. But he did neither. He was simply there, steady, patient, and unbothered by her silence. One evening, as she sat on a bench in the park, lost in thought, he passed by and noticed the book in her hands. "That's a good one," he said gently, pointing to the cover. She looked up a little startled. "You've read it?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, sitting down a short distance away, not too close, not too far. "It helped me during a difficult time. Books can do that sometimes." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, they can." That was the first real conversation between them, and though it lasted only a few minutes, it left her unsettled. Not in a bad way, but in a way that stirred something she had long buried. His words were simple, but there was a weight behind them, as if he spoke not from theory, but from experience. She caught herself thinking about that conversation later at night, replaying his calm tone and thoughtful eyes. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths more often. Sometimes it was in the park, sometimes at the small cafe she liked, and once in the grocery store again. Each time, he greeted her with the same steady kindness, never overstepping, never demanding her attention. She began to realize that she didn't mind his presence. In fact, she found herself looking forward to the small exchanges, though she didn't want to admit it. He told her little pieces about himself. He didn't boast about being a soldier, but in small comments, she gathered pieces of his story. He had seen places she could only imagine. He had lived through situations that tested his limits. Yet, despite that, he carried no bitterness. Instead, he carried a quiet strength, the kind that made people feel safe without even knowing why. She found herself wondering about him more than she wanted to. Why did he choose this neighborhood? Why did he speak so little about himself yet, leave such a strong impression? Why, when he looked at her, did she feel as if he truly saw her, not just the version she presented to the world? But she also reminded herself of her promise. She had vowed never to let anyone in. She kept her guard high, convincing herself that these small meetings meant nothing. He was just a neighbor, just a stranger who happened to cross her path. And yet, deep down, she knew that was not the whole truth. There was something about him that unsettled her walls. It was not romance, not yet, but it was something she couldn't ignore. He reminded her of a possibility she had long rejected, the possibility that not everyone came into her life to hurt her. Some people came quietly, asking for nothing, giving only presence. For the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone when she walked through the park. For the first time, she found herself slowing down when she saw someone familiar. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a change she had once sworn would never happen. The soldier had entered her life gently, with no promises, no demands, and no expectations. And though she still told herself she wasn't interested, her heart was beginning to notice something her mind refused to accept. The days began to feel different, though she would never have admitted it openly. Something had shifted almost quietly in the background of her life. She still held on to her walls, still reminded herself not to trust too easily, but the soldier's presence was slowly carving small cracks in the armor she had built around her heart. At first, she told herself it was nothing more than friendliness. A neighbor who happened to be kind, respectful, and steady. But the more they crossed paths, the more she noticed details that her heart could not ignore. He never rushed her, never tried to push into her private world, and yet somehow, his presence brought her a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in years. She began to notice how he carried himself, the way he walked with calm purpose, as if every step was measured. His voice, though not used often, always carried a steady tone that seemed to soothe her when they spoke. Even the small conversations, the ones that might appear meaningless to others, left her thinking about them long after they ended. One evening, she sat on her favorite bench in the park, a book in her hands. The air was cool and the sun was setting, painting the sky with soft orange shades. She didn't expect anyone to join her, but when she glanced up, she saw him walking toward her, with a gentle smile. He carried a small cup of coffee in his hand and paused for a moment before asking, "Do you mind if I sit here?" Her instinct was to say no, to protect her space, but something inside her softened. "It's fine," she replied quietly. He sat down, leaving enough distance to respect her comfort but not so far that it felt distant. They didn't speak at first. He sipped his coffee and she pretended to focus on her book, though she was far more aware of his presence than of the words on the page. After a few minutes he asked, "What do you like about that book?" The question was simple, but it caught her off guard. Most people asked if she had finished reading or what the story was about, but he asked what she liked about it, as if he wanted to understand the way she saw the world. Slowly she began to talk. Not much at first, just a few sentences, but as the conversation unfolded, she found herself saying more than she planned. She spoke about how books gave her escape, how they helped her breathe on days when life felt too heavy. He listened, really listened, without interrupting. His eyes didn't wander, and his attention didn't drift. When she finished, he nodded, thoughtfully, and said, "That makes sense. Sometimes when you can't change the world around you, stories give you a place to rest." She looked at him, surprised. Those words felt like they carried weight, as if he knew what it meant to seek refuge from difficult realities. For the first time in a long while, she felt understood, not judged. From that evening onward, her interactions with him grew more natural. The conversations became longer, sometimes about simple things like the weather or daily routines, and other times about deeper topics, dreams, fears, and lessons life had taught them. She found herself sharing small pieces of her past, things she rarely told anyone. It startled her how easily the words flowed when he was near. But with that openness came fear. After one such conversation, she returned home and sat on her bed, her heart racing. She whispered to herself, "What are you doing? You promised not to trust anyone again." The thought of letting him in even slightly frightened her. She knew how badly trust could be broken, and yet she couldn't deny the strange peace she felt whenever he was around. What made it even harder to resist was his patience. He never asked for more than she was ready to give. If she wanted silence, he gave her silence. If she wanted conversation, he listened. He didn't make her feel guilty for holding back. He simply let her be herself. And in that freedom, she began to lower her guard without realizing it. One day, as they walked through the park together, she noticed how he stopped to help an elderly man pick up a bag that had slipped from his hands. He didn't do it for recognition, didn't expect a thank you, and moved on quietly afterward. She saw the way he treated people, not just her, but everyone, with quiet respect. And something inside her stirred. For years, she had believed kindness was just a mask people wore until they revealed their true selves. But here was a man whose actions matched his words, whose consistency made it hard for her to keep believing her old fears. Slowly, laughter returned to her life. Not the forced kind she sometimes shared with colleagues or acquaintances, but real laughter, the kind that bubbled up unexpectedly. One afternoon when they were sitting in the park, he shared a story about a funny mistake he made during his early training days as a soldier. The way he told it, with just the right balance of humor and humility, made her laugh so hard that tears formed in her eyes. She hadn't laughed like that in years, and afterward, she found herself thinking, maybe I've missed this more than I realized. Her family began to notice the small changes too. She seemed lighter, less closed off, more willing to talk. When her friend asked casually if she had met someone new, she quickly denied it. "No, it's nothing like that," she insisted. But deep inside she knew something was changing, whether she wanted it to or not. At night she thought about him more often, not in a romantic way, at least that's what she told herself, but in a curious, thoughtful way. She wondered about the places he had been, the challenges he had faced, and the strength it must have taken to endure them. She also wondered why he chose to spend time with her when she offered so little in return. It was in those quiet reflections that she realized the cracks in her walls were growing. She wasn't ready to tear them down completely, but for the first time she didn't feel desperate to rebuild them either. The soldier had shown her something different, not by grand gestures or promises, but by small, consistent actions that spoke louder than any words. She found herself at a crossroads. Part of her wanted to retreat, to protect herself from the risk of disappointment. But another part, a small yet persistent part, wanted to see where this new path could lead. That small part whispered to her in the quiet of the night, telling her that maybe, just maybe, not all people were the same. And though she still clung tightly to her fears, she couldn't deny it anymore. The soldier had begun to change something inside her. The thought of a partner once terrifying no longer felt like a nightmare. It felt like a possibility she couldn't quite ignore. Life has a way of testing people when they least expect it. She thought things were slowly settling, that her days had found a gentle rhythm with his presence in them. Their conversations, their quiet walks, the comfort of his steady nature, it all made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. But safety is not something life guarantees, and soon she found herself in a situation that shook her to the core. It happened one late evening after work. The city streets were quieter than usual, and she decided to take the long way home, enjoying the cool air. She didn't notice the group of strangers walking behind her at first, but when their footsteps grew louder, she felt a wave of unease. She tried to stay calm, telling herself it was nothing, but her instincts whispered otherwise. Her heart began to race as she quickened her steps. The voices behind her grew louder, closer, and filled with mocking laughter. Fear tightened in her chest. Memories of past hurt flashed before her eyes, and for a moment she felt like the walls she had built around her heart were collapsing under the weight of fear. She wished she wasn't alone, wished there was someone steady to lean on. And then, like fate answering her unspoken prayer, he appeared. The soldier. He had been nearby, finishing a late run, when he saw her tense steps and the group following too closely. Without hesitation, he approached, his expression calm but sharp. His presence was enough to make the strangers falter. With a firm, commanding voice, he told them to leave. There was no shouting, no unnecessary aggression, just quiet authority, the kind that came from years of discipline. The men backed away, muttering under their breath, but they didn't dare test him further. She stood frozen, still shaking. He turned to her, his voice gentle now. "Are you all right?" Tears she didn't expect stung her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, I think so." He walked her home that night, not saying much, but his presence was enough to calm the storm inside her. When they reached her building, she whispered, "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "You don't ever have to go through something like that alone." Those words stayed with her long after she went inside. She sat on her couch, hugging a pillow, thinking about how easily he had stepped in. Not as a hero demanding recognition, but simply as someone who cared. That night, for the first time in years, she cried. Not out of fear, but out of the deep realization that maybe she didn't have to carry everything alone. The days that followed deepened her trust in him. She began to see more clearly that his strength wasn't just in his muscles or training, but in his loyalty and quiet protection. He never acted like she was weak. Instead, he treated her as though she was strong, but that even strong people deserved someone by their side. One evening, as they sat together on a bench, she finally asked a question that had been sitting heavy on her heart. "Why are you so patient with me? I know I don't make it easy. I keep my distance and I don't open up easily, but you never give up." He looked at her, his eyes steady, and said, "Because I know what it feels like to carry too much alone. In the army, you learn that no one survives by themselves. You need someone watching your back. And I think you've been alone for too long." His words broke something inside her, not in a painful way, but in a healing way. She looked away, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. She wanted to tell him everything, all the reasons she had shut herself off, all the times she had been hurt, but the words wouldn't come yet. Instead, she whispered, "It's hard to believe someone won't leave when that's all you've known." "I'm not here to leave," he replied quietly. "I'm here because I want to be." Those words replayed in her mind for days. She found herself smiling at random moments, not because life was perfect, but because for the first time she believed that maybe someone truly meant what they said. Her walls, though still standing, began to feel lighter. She didn't tear them down in one day. She was too cautious for that, but she no longer rebuilt them after every crack. She allowed herself to lean on him a little more. She invited him to join her for coffee after work one day, something she would have never dared before. They sat in a small cafe talking about ordinary things, childhood memories, favorite foods, dreams they never admitted aloud. She found herself laughing again, not because she had to, but because he made her feel free enough to do so. But the real turning point came one afternoon when she faced a personal crisis. A close family member fell ill suddenly, and she was overwhelmed by fear and responsibility. In the past, she would have carried the weight silently, refusing to let anyone see her struggle. But this time, without even thinking, she called him. He came immediately, not with empty promises, but with steady actions. He drove her to the hospital, stayed with her through the long wait, and never once left her side. When exhaustion threatened to break her, he handed her water, reminded her to breathe, and offered the simple comfort of silence when words weren't enough. At one point, when her emotions overwhelmed her, she whispered, "I don't know how. I'd get through this alone." "You don't have to," he said firmly. "Not anymore." In that moment, she felt something shift deep inside her. All the fears, the doubts, the belief that love was nothing but pain. Suddenly, they didn't feel as strong as they once did. His presence showed her a different kind of love, one built not on empty promises but on loyalty, patience, and quiet strength. For the first time, she began to believe that maybe love wasn't about weakness or heartbreak. Maybe it was about finding someone who stood by you when life felt impossible, someone who didn't try to fix you but simply refused to let you face the storms alone. That realization both frightened and comforted her. It frightened her because it meant she was allowing herself to feel again, but it comforted her because, deep inside, she knew she was no longer walking alone. The soldier had shown her what love could be, not through grand declarations, but through small, consistent moments of presence. And though she wasn't ready to say it aloud, she knew her heart was changing. The woman who once rejected the thought of a partner was slowly, carefully, learning to accept the possibility that love, real love, might not be a threat after all. Time moved gently, almost as if it sensed the changes happening inside her. She was no longer the same woman who had once rejected the thought of a human partner. Slowly, carefully, she began to feel what she had long denied: hope, trust, and a quiet warmth that grew stronger with each passing day. It started with small gestures. He would leave her a cup of coffee just the way she liked it, or remember a small story she had shared weeks ago. He didn't expect anything in return. There were no demands, no pressure, just the quiet constancy of someone who cared. And with each small gesture, her heart, which had been locked away for so long, began to open a little more. One evening, as they walked through the park, the sky painted in soft pink and orange hues, she realized how much she had come to rely on his presence. She didn't notice it at first. She had always been cautious, but now she found herself scanning the paths, hoping to see him, feeling a quiet relief when their eyes met. For the first time, she admitted silently to herself that life without him felt empty. She remembered all the fears she had carried for so long. The fear of betrayal, of heartbreak, of trusting the wrong person again. They had shaped her life, made her cautious, made her avoid intimacy. And yet, standing next to him now, she realized that love didn't have to be those things. Love didn't have to hurt. It could be steady, kind, and real, just like him. Their bond grew not through dramatic gestures or declarations, but through moments that built trust day by day. When she was nervous about work challenges, he listened without judgment. When she faced small anxieties, he offered encouragement, not criticism. He never told her how she should feel, only that he would be there with her no matter what. And that promise, quiet and unspoken, became more powerful than any words she had ever heard. One rainy afternoon, when the world outside seemed gray, and heavy. She found herself walking home alone and slipping slightly on the wet pavement. Before she could even recover, his hand was there, steadying her. "I told you I'd be here," he said softly, helping her regain balance. The simplicity of the gesture, the reliability behind it, made her chest tighten with an emotion she could no longer hide. She looked up at him, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel completely vulnerable. It wasn't easy for her. Old habits, old fears did not vanish overnight. There were moments when she pulled back slightly, afraid to let herself fall completely into something so unknown. But every time she hesitated, he didn't push. He simply stayed, proving again and again that his intentions were genuine, that his presence was steady, and that he would not abandon her. Through his patience, she began to trust not only him but also herself. She learned that opening up didn't have to mean losing control. She discovered that love could coexist with independence and strength. She realized that allowing someone in didn't make her weak. It made her human. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a small hill overlooking the city, she finally spoke words she had kept inside for a long time. I was so afraid of being hurt again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought no one could be trusted, that love would only bring pain." He turned to her, his eyes calm and steady. "I know," he said simply, "and I can't change the past, but I can promise that I'll be here. I'll choose to stand by you every day no matter what comes." Her heart swelled with emotion. Tears threatened to fall, but they were tears of relief, of understanding, and of a love that had been growing quietly, patiently all along. For the first time in years, she felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling that maybe life had given her exactly what she needed, not by rushing her, not by forcing her, but by showing up consistently and genuinely. In the weeks that followed, she noticed changes not only in her heart but in her life. She laughed more freely, took small risks she would have avoided before, and allowed herself to hope for the future. And as her trust grew, so did the bond between them. Their friendship became deeper, richer, and eventually blossomed into a love she had once thought impossible. The woman who had once been terrified of the idea of a human partner now found herself looking forward to moments with him, seeking his company, and feeling a joy that had been missing from her life for far too long. It was not the overwhelming, dramatic love of stories or movies. It was something steadier, more real, a love built on patience, respect, and the quiet understanding that they were there for each other through life's uncertainties. One day, sitting together on a park bench where they had shared so many small conversations, she took his hand in hers. "I never thought I'd feel this way," she admitted softly. "I never believed it could happen to me." He squeezed her hand gently. "Love is not about who you think it will come from," he said. "It's about finding someone who shows up for you, even when you're not sure you deserve it." Her heart felt full, finally free from the fear that had dominated it for so long. She realized that the soldier hadn't changed her by force or persuasion. He had simply been himself, patient, kind, and steady, and through that, he had shown her a different way to experience love. She had learned that trust was not a weakness, that vulnerability was not something to fear, and that allowing someone into her life could be the most courageous thing she had ever done. From that day forward, she carried a quiet confidence. She no longer saw love as terrifying. She no longer built walls to keep it away. Instead, she embraced the possibility that life could be shared, that support and understanding could exist without conditions, and that happiness could be real when two people chose to face it together. The thought that had once terrified her, the thought of a human partner, no longer held fear. It held hope. It held warmth. It held a promise of companionship, understanding, and quiet strength. And in that promise, she found herself finally free to love and be loved in return. The soldier hadn't just changed her life. He had changed the way she saw herself and the world around her. And in that change, she discovered that love, when genuine, could be a source of strength, courage, and joy, a truth she would carry with her for the rest of her life.